Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're so happy to see so many of you for today's program focusing on college student mental health. I'm Mitch Kirsch, and together with my husband Rod, we'll be hosting today's event. We are both retired from Penn State, but are so pleased to host this discussion, which focuses on a topic we are both very passionate about.
Before we tell you a bit more about today's speaker, we'd like to give you a few logistical reminders. First of all, the session is being recorded, and it will be shared with you and those who couldn't be with us here this hour. Your microphones are currently muted, but we encourage you to turn on your cameras so we can see each other. And finally, following the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. To ask a question, you can send a note using the chat box in the control bar at any time. I first became aware of what a Center of Concern Mental Health is to our Penn State students while attending a student leaders retreat about 12 years ago. Student mental health was by a wide margin the #1 student concern out of about 15 different areas.
And during my 37-year career in higher education, I always worked in a very student-facing role. The last 15 years of my career, I served as Associate Dean for Student Affairs in the Schreier Honors College. Fortunately, issues of student mental health and well-being emerged from the background during this time, and I found myself working regularly with students struggling with anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. I found Stephanie and her colleagues at CAPS, the Center for Counseling and Psychological Services, to be a valuable resource as we work together to support students through these difficult times.
As parents, we also experienced the professional support offered by CAPS when our older daughter, Kelsey, was a victim of sexual assault during her first year at Penn State. She struggled with trauma and depression, but received excellent counseling support from CAPS, and we saw the positive impact their services had on her personal growth and recovery. She is now a vibrant young woman working as a professional family therapist in Denver. As a result of both our professional and personal experiences, we became donors to CAPS in 2016, establishing the first embedded counselor position on campus. We continue to believe very strongly in what CAPS is doing to help Penn Staters succeed both in and outside the classroom.
So today, it's our honor to introduce you to someone whose work is making a difference in the health and well-being of Penn State students as part of the team at CAPS. We are excited for you to hear about her work and the efforts of the entire team at CAPS. Dr. Stephanie Stama is a Penn State graduate who earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from Florida Institute of Technology. I worked closely with Stephanie in her role as an embedded counselor in South Halls when I was at Schreier, so I know firsthand her commitment to supporting Penn State students. She is currently the Assistant Director of Community Education and Outreach for CAPS and will share some initiatives and programs offered to improve the overall well-being of Penn State students. Please welcome Dr. Stephanie Stama.
Thank you both so much. It's lovely to see so many faces today, even if you're in tiny boxes, and lovely to see Mitch and Rod again. As Mitch mentioned, we worked closely together as we had pursued the embedded counselor position that year. And I think it's a great example of how philanthropic support can really be such a meaningful component to meeting students' needs and our overall mission here at CAPS. So again, I'm Stephanie Stama. I'm hopeful today I can speak with you all about CAPS. For anyone who might be new and hasn't heard a little bit of a CAPS spiel, I'll share a little bit of an overview of our mission here at CAPS and some of our basic services that we offer here at the Counseling Center. And also talk a little bit about what college student mental health has been looking like over the past year. I know there's a lot of question about how COVID's affected things, and also looking forward into the future and how we are hopeful to kind of make some more pursuits moving forward. So at CAPS, I want to just sort of be mindful of when we're talking about CAPS today. I think people usually think of counseling and psychological services at the University Park campus. And largely when I'm speaking about our services today, that is what I am going to be speaking to. I also, though, do want to push the reminder that we have an entire wealth of Commonwealth campuses that have their own counseling centers and their own counselors. And while we do a lot of collaboration together, their services they offer and their entire setups and systems in their offices actually look incredibly different in a lot of ways. For example, sometimes there's only one counselor who's the dedicated counselor for that counseling center. And that person might also be wearing multiple hats. So they may also, for example, be the director or the coordinator of the disability resource office of that particular Commonwealth campus too. So there's a lot of complexity as we're thinking about CAPS, and I'll put that in the air quotes because there is a lot that's kind of going on when we think about our counseling center across all Penn State campuses, including World Campus as well, which is also its own separate entity as we're talking about different campuses here. But overall, CAPS is the primary mental health provider for enrolled students. So we don't work with faculty or staff. This is only for students and students who are enrolled as at their primary campus. So for my work, it's for students who are enrolled at University Park when we're talking about formal clinical services. And overall, the CAPS mission is to make sure that students are getting their needs met in a mental health and wellness oriented way so they can really be their best selves and ultimately be able to really reach their academic goals and their career goals. There's a lot involved when we think about what mental health and wellness looks like, because inevitably that's woven throughout other areas of wellness that could be physical wellness, social and interpersonal wellness. It's really spans the gamut. So I'll speak a little bit more towards some of our wellness oriented goals looking forward, as that is a big part of our university's strategic plan, especially for student affairs. Another component of our mission and what makes it really crucial, and actually our best practices for us as clinicians, is making sure that we are taking into consideration anyone we interact with. So not just students, but faculty, staff, other stakeholders, taking into consideration everybody's background, their history, their heritage, their cultural experiences, their values, their beliefs. Only by doing that are we actually going to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at and looking toward actually helping them be their best selves. So painting that picture, I do want to transition a little bit to just orienting everybody to the counseling center and the services that we offer. Again, I'll be speaking primarily here to University Park campus. We kind of have two banks of services. The way I think about it are more wellness-oriented services, which are really, they can be anything, not a formal treatment service. So this is usually stuff that doesn't require an appointment, for example. And then there's another bank of services that are formal treatment or formal clinical services. So our wellness services, I'd say a great example of a really popular wellness service that we offer is CAPS Chat, which was actually one of the primary and most important components that we actually were able to extract and carry forward from our embedded counselor pilot year. And CAPS Chat, for anyone who hasn't yet heard of this, it's a one-on-one meeting with a CAPS counselor. Students just drop in. Right now it is remote, so students actually just sign up online for a meeting up to the minute and have a one-on-one really informal meeting with a counselor. So there's no like formal paperwork anyone's completing. And the nice thing about this is that it's for students who might need to be met where they're at. So typically we're on site across the campus, maybe in a residence hall area, or at the Multicultural Resource Center or our Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. And those are ways that we can literally meet students where they're at while also helping them address maybe any concerns that they have that they don't feel comfortable reaching out to the counseling center for. And it's also for concerns that are, I'll say lower risk. You know, we don't want students walking into CAPS Chat who expecting a brief meeting, a 30-minute meeting with a counselor, but having concerns about maybe suicidal thoughts or, you know, thoughts of harming others. those are definitely people we want to make sure we're leaving a lot of quality space and time for in a more formal service, which is that other bank of services, the more formal clinical services. So just to kind of differentiate that a little bit, I hope that helps to clarify. We also offer drop-in groups. So we have drop-in groups that are oriented for women of color empowerment group, Black and Latino male empowerment group, sexual and gender diverse student support group, one we call also weekly wellness, which is for any student this past year, regardless of what state they were located in. That was a big component of our practice this year, was really being a little limited to location while students were in various states and countries of residence. Interfaith dialogues for spirituality discussions, and we also have a group that's called Smart Recovery, that's in collaboration with the Center for the CRC, the Collegiate Recovery Community. So all of these are actually collaborations with other offices on campuses. They're located, the groups themselves are located in those offices. And I think those sorts of groups are awesome because that's an easy area where we can actually do a lot of growth and something that we're always pursuing in future years. Over the past year, the final major, I'll say, wellness services we've started to really orient to are videos, educational videos, and a set of videos we call life hacks, which are pre-packaged sets of orientation to some of our wellness platforms. So WellTrack and You at PSU are two very important wellness platforms we use to help students do a little bit of their self-education and self-investment in all areas of wellness. Again, I mentioned we'll come back to this big picture wellness. It's not just mental health, it's physical health, it's academic and career health, it's connection to others and social health. And You at PSU is a platform that's actually their entire mantra. That's exactly what they do. And so the You at PSU platform's been a really wonderful resource for orienting toward more of the wellness components of the bigger picture. I'll transition a little bit here quickly to our more clinical services. Again, for anyone who maybe just hasn't learned a whole lot about CAPS before, just may prefer a reminder. Typically, when people think about a counseling center, these are the services they're stereotypically thinking about. So group therapy, which at the University Park Counseling Center office is actually an unlimited, no cost to students. As long as they're enrolled, they can continue attending group therapy, as long as it's something that's clinically recommended. Individual counseling, couples counseling, psychiatric evaluation services, and medication services. The case managers here offer wonderful case management services to get students connected to either other local resources or perhaps to a counselor who's more specialized in the community, who's going to better meet their needs. So we really span the gamut in the services that we offer. We also have specialized counselors and groups who meet for clinical services related to eating disorder recovery, sexual and gender diverse students, a trans care team, alcohol and other drug care. So we really try to make sure we're addressing the variety of needs. And I think as we talk about what does CAPS need, like this is sort of the picture of what CAPS does, but what does CAPS need? I think it's a great question, because we kind of have to shift based on the landscape, and we don't know what's coming in the next year. We can make a lot of guesses and assumptions, but we actually just don't know. And that today is something I'm kind of also hopeful to address a little bit. One more piece, though, I do want to make sure I'm addressing before we go there is talking a little bit about the Center for Collegiate Mental Health, Ccmh. Ccmh is actually a research house that's actually housed here at Penn State, and a number of our CAPS clinicians actually are components, major components actually of keeping Ccmh running. But Ccmh is a massive research database, over 650 college counseling centers in the nation, actually some internationally in the past. have been a contributing part of membership as parts of collecting data and using data for students who attend counseling at their centers. Accessing all of that data helps us to keep sort of our pulse on college student mental health almost in real time. We just annually take a look at what's happening in college student mental health, and we orient our services really based on that. So because this is actually housed really within Penn State and very largely within CAPS, we really have this opportunity to be on the forefront of knowledge and implementation of best practices. So a lot of what we do, actually everything that we do, is really based on the best practices that this research is telling us really is what we need to do to meet students where they're at and how to meet their needs. As far as college student mental health, what we're kind of looking at here in the near future, I think people are kind of wondering, as students are coming back from a year of being fairly isolated, what's this going to look like? Maybe people have heard the term FOGO, fear of going out, is sort of the new thing instead of fear of missing out. A lot of social anxiety wonderings and concerns. Will people feel very isolated or afraid of kind of going out and being with other peers? Will they adjust okay? So just some data that Ccmh has actually helped us sort of align with as we're wondering these things. In the past year, actually, so we've asked students when they come for services, are you seeking services directly related to COVID, or are you seeking services for reasons other than COVID? Essentially, you might have come here for services regardless of the pandemic. Students actually indicated, 2/3 of the students actually indicated they were coming for services not related to COVID. Only 1/3 were coming related to specific COVID reasons. And that could have been a variety of things, you know, illness, maybe loss of somebody close to them related to COVID, fear or anxiety of going out because of COVID, increased hand washing behaviors, and increasing their triggers for obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms because of COVID. Those would have fit in that category. What we're actually seeing, though, is that 2/3 of our students are actually presenting with concerns not necessarily directly related to COVID. But for those who did, that 1/3 of students who did really come for COVID-related reasons, their concerns were related to anxiety, stress, depression, academic performance, social isolation, probably not surprising, and adjusting to a new environment. And those are really similar concerns to what we also see for our students who are here more broadly on a regular basis in previous years too. But I think the real important thing to note here is that those students, that 1/3, they actually only had a very slight increase in levels of distress compared to that 2/3 of students who were here for general reasons. So I think it's helpful to wonder, yeah, maybe students will be coming in the fall semester with a lot of stress and anxiety and hesitancy about going out, maybe some social anxiety. We all feel socially awkward now, right? And, you know, and maybe they'll also actually be more resilient. Maybe this past year has actually helped them increase their strengths and use their strengths to really get creative about how to manage in the world. And so I think we want to be thinking in a strengths-based way too. And that is a very wellness-oriented model of thinking when we're thinking wellness being a very preventative, oriented, strengths-based approach. So just conscious of time. And so I want to hit one really important feature here home. If anyone's ever actually attended one of these conversations with our director, Ben Locke, he always wants to make sure that we're talking about the mental health crisis and the myth of the mental health crisis, that often we think, oh my gosh, there's so much more mental health problems happening. More students are actually having mental health concerns. And actually, there are two pieces to this that actually feel really important. And one is that mental health concerns in the sort of traditional college student age range, so in late teens throughout the 20s, it's actually a very normative experience. It's kind of developmentally what you would expect, some general anxiety and even some depression symptoms, which are usually our highest rated concerns when we see students coming to the counseling center. Also, we have had a lot of initiatives over the past, decade or two. So a great example is the Garrett Lee Smith Memorial Act. So this was an act where they produced more resources and funding toward reducing the attempts and completions of suicide. So what they found, this was a 2004 act, and so around 2000, I think it was 10, they did a little check-in and identified that actually the funding really going toward this act had helped to reduce stigma and increase awareness. And I think that was the goal. They found that fewer attempts and completions of suicides were happening, and less money was actually being put into medical care related to suicide attempts and completions. And that is the ultimate goal, that we are helping people be more aware of themselves. And part of that identity development is your mental health. And so the wonderful thing here is that actually it's kind of a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. People are more aware of their mental health concerns and how they're affected by their anxiety, their stressors, depression symptoms. So while some of that may be normative, certainly some of it's not, and we want to make sure we're helping people differentiate that as well. What we're seeing, though, is with an uptick of people identifying mental health concerns in a really positive way, we become, instead of a crisis of mental health, it's actually a crisis of capacity. While we have more students enrolling in Penn State and more of those students also being comfortable identifying mental health concerns and conscious and aware of them, our staff levels stay pretty much the same. Our space remains the same. Right now, CAPS, for example, is in 3 locations, and we're kind of sewing together our connections and services across those locations. We rent a space, and we, being the university, helps us rent a space downtown in State College, and then we have a couple of sites here on campus as well. And there are, I think, certainly ways that that sounds beneficial. I think it's great that we have a location downtown to kind of meet students closer to where they live. Also, at the same time, our staff is disconnected and we don't have more space for more people. So we could say hire more staff all day long, but really, where are they going to go? There really isn't space for that. So we're kind of at this impasse in many ways. And I think that's where I transitioned to thinking about philanthropic support. A lot of the time we're looking at philanthropy and support that comes in that is endowment based. So we have a lot of endowments, not a lot, I'll say, but we have a lot of offers of endowments. And what happens is, tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of an endowment, we actually only have a very small percentage we can touch every year, maybe about $1,000 or so. And so sometimes also these endowments are very specific. So they can only be used towards certain topics, needs, populations, et cetera. And what happens is that amount, actually, we only can touch this small chunk. And that gives us money to do things like print brochures and do a little bit of outreach, which is very important. But if you think about something like a wellness portal, some of our wellness portals to help improve wellness and well-being across the university to access more students in a preventative way, that's actually around the $50,000 range. So there's a little bit of a challenge that we come across where we kind of have to sew together a little bit of services, funding to make services really happen in a really functional, meaningful way. The way I think about it is this metaphor of a swimming pool. Like if we were all saying like, all right, the goal is let's make a swimming pool so students can go swimming. And we all kind of take our shovels and we scatter and we dig some holes for half a day. Then by the end of the day, we're each going to have a small hole. We can maybe stick like a foot or a couple feet in, but we're not actually meeting the goal of helping students go swimming. So what we can do instead is maybe think bigger picture, maybe strategically kind of put our heads together and say, okay, let's meet at this specific spot. We'll all dig together and then we can have a swimming pool. And if we dig for half a day together, we might actually have space where 1 or 2 people can go swimming, and we've actually met our goal. So it sounds really like theoretically beautiful, and in practice aware like how complicated that can be. A staff position, funding a staff position is, is not, it's not a small ask. Space, there's a lot of talk of having a wellness building where CAPS staff could all be housed, which would be wonderful. But again, not a small ask. But there could be some specific things like contributing to funding for a building, or naming rights, or a relaxation room where we could do preventative services, staffing, a salary for a number of years, or a set of unrestricted funds where the director can have some discretionary spending because we can't see the future. While we might say, okay, this is only this can only be used for social anxiety or people affected by COVID, we may not necessarily actually see those students. So it's a little bit of a complex picture, and we're trying to do the best we can with what we, with those sort of loopholes, and we make it work. I think there are ways that as CAPS try to pursue a lot of our services moving forward and really reach students in a deep and meaningful way, instead of a very piecemeal way. I think that's what we're really kind of hopeful to do, and a little bit of the bind that we're in at the same time. I am conscious of time, and I want to make sure I'm leaving some extra space here for Q&A coming up. I see some questions have come through the chat. I haven't seen them myself, but saw some pop up, so I can just sort of pause here and say thanks everybody. And I hope this has been a little bit of a helpful start to a conversation.
Thanks, Stephanie. There actually was one comment made by Tracy Regal, which is a suggestion. She had heard Ben speak to the Parents Council several years ago, and she said it was a really helpful presentation. So she was suggesting perhaps that there might be a future article in the Parents newsletter to outline some of the services that CAPS is providing to provide an update.
Absolutely, that sounds wonderful. And I'll share, this year, this is my first year actually in this particular role. One of my parts of this role is heading the CAPS advisory board, which includes representatives from UPUA, GPSA, from Parents Program, and then a number of our collaborative partners around campus, the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity and the Multicultural Resource Center. And absolutely, I think we're looking for as much sort of cross collaboration and sharing of information as we can do. That sounds like a lovely idea, Tracy. And I think also, it primed me to think about, we actually just started our own newsletter. And that's something that is another way we can hopefully start to distribute not just information about CAPS services, but also how people can be a lot more preventative focused in terms of their mental health, or even just self-aware in terms of mental health. And we'll often share a lot of information sort of related to that, and also non-CAP services around campus that are mental health oriented. There's a lot that the whole community is trying to do. So we often will try to tap into that as well. So wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we'll invite everybody. If you have questions for Stephanie, certainly feel free to add them into the chat room while we have her attention here for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. There is a question from Rich. Many of us aware of stigma associated with mental health issues. What steps does CAPS take to mitigate those stigmas so that students who need help don't feel anxiety or less anxiety about seeking the help that they need?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And that's actually a large part of my role with community education and outreach. So taking on this role, a lot of the way that our outreach program actually currently operates is that we receive requests from really anybody in the community. So often faculty or staff who will request, hey, can you come and speak to my class, or the set of incoming students or RAs who are getting trained to give them information about CAP services, and then maybe some other things like stress management or mindfulness, and they'll sort of select a topic they feel is really oriented to their students' needs. And so when we do that, that is one way we're able to really put, I think there's a face to the name, but also give students information about CAPS services, anxiety, for example, and help meet them where they're at. Again, that's also a goal of CAPS Chat and our drop-in groups, that we're able to be not in our CAPS space. I think there is certainly a stigma of, oh, I'm going up to the 5th floor of the Student Health Center. People will know when I push that button. And so we're trying to, we're certainly aware of that, and we can't really do anything about the location piece other than go elsewhere. And so we're doing more and more as we can to go elsewhere. I think remote work has actually opened up a lot of doors and opportunities too, where we're able to have a little bit of a less stigmatizing environment by solely having remote options. People can just sort of sign on and sign in instead of physically walking to a space where they may feel less comfortable. And that's actually some feedback we received, some positive feedback. Students who attended group therapy, for example. Group therapy is really scary. You're meeting with strangers who may or may not be similar to you, and students said that kind of extra arm's length of being remote was really beneficial for helping them actually cross over a little bit the anxiety barrier too. So I think we can get creative too about continuing to use some remote services.
Stephanie, I've got a question, maybe just a bigger picture question about just the office itself.
Yeah.
What the composition of the staff is, how many therapists, how many physicians you have. You talked about we have a crisis of capacity. So I'm just curious about what does the office really look like in terms of its staffing?
Yeah, we have 60 staff overall. That does include, that does include our front office staff. So really all of our staff as we're looking at a whole. We also have, we are a training program. So every year we have, trying to think of the number, usually about 10 to 15 trainees. Majority of them are from doctorate programs. They're in training, so they are clinicians and their primary work is clinical in nature. But they do contribute to other services like CAPS Chat, and also actually a not very well-known service we offer, assessment for ADHD and personality diagnoses. So that's a huge component of our services. We're having some staffing changes, so I'm going through in my mind. We've got three case managers. One is a and then we also have one World Campus case manager who works within CAPS, but does majority of work with World Campus. We currently have 3 psychiatrists, psychiatric staff, and then I think that's primarily it. And then I think we're at about right now. So in the summer, our numbers are also lower, but I'll say in our typical academic year, we're at about 35 clinical staff. So staff who are licensed professional counselors, licensed social workers, psychologists who are doing the kind of one-on-one stereotypical like clinical work at CAPS.
Okay. Another question from Dennis. What kind of follow-up do you have to report? What measurements are you using to evaluate success? Also, any info on how the mental health of Penn State students compares to other universities?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So yeah, for measurements of success and that kind of general follow-up, I will say over this past year, because we have just started moving back into our physical offices and still have one location, we're moving back in this Friday. So our operations team, who also is primarily our research team, they haven't yet pulled a whole lot of data for our past year. But as we've actually taken also the opportunity to reach out to some students who actually sought services with us, both pre-pandemic in person, post-pandemic, so during during the pandemic while we were remote, and then both remote and in person. And we are seeing that students actually have a preference for in-person services. So that's an interesting, despite some of the feedback that we had received more qualitatively about the comfort, there's still a preference for being in person, face-to-face. And yeah, we are seeing these numbers. So the anxiety, stress, depression, academic performance concerns, social isolation, and adjusting to a new environment. Those are nationwide, and that's also consistent with what we see at Penn State. So it's very consistent what we see nationally. So if anybody also wants to, if anybody ever looks at the Ccmh website or the annual report, that information is really consistent with what we see at Penn State. So top concerns are general anxiety, depression, stress, and adjustment.
Stephanie, I have a question. Given some of your comments that you made about the issues of space and the different locations that you are all in, if there was interest out there from somebody who wanted to help with your space issues, would that be best accomplished by building a central office for CAPS, or would you prefer finding remote locations which might be more discreet? In your opinion, which do you think would be better?
It's a really good question. I do think, because this is certainly something we've all also had the fantasizing wonderings about, like, what would we like to do if we could? But in reality, outside of that, really having a central hub, a central location makes a lot of sense. There have been other schools that do really the embedded model, and they do have other locations. What tends to happen is that those staff, if they don't have a majority of time in their centralized location, they feel very disconnected, morale is low, and they actually, it becomes more problematic, and then maintenance of those staff actually also becomes problematic. So it's what we've seen in some other, especially other Big Ten institutions. This will sometimes happen as well. So a centralized hub is, I think, our sort of primary goal in the long run. And it also helps improve communication. Even just being able to walk by somebody's office and say, hey, you're really our specialist in eating disorder recovery for binge eating, then I know that's somebody I can just do a quick consultation with, versus having to schedule a meeting and, oh, we're not available together at the same time until next week. And that I might see the student again and before that next week. So the sort of informal consultation and connection and communication that happens in a centralized location is also really crucial to our work.
Stephanie, I'm curious, and again, if anybody has any other questions, we probably have a few minutes left, or maybe one or two. But I'm curious, based on your experiences this last year, and working with students in a totally different kind of environment than you've ever had before. Is there anything that you and the staff have come out of that you think you learned that you might not have otherwise known if you were in a very traditional year? Anything that will help you moving forward?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think really the big picture of resiliency and the flexibility and adaptability, not just that we had as a staff, or you think even as a university, but students, they were able to adapt and be flexible and get really creative about how to best meet their needs. I think it helped, while people felt, I think, very stuck. I think a lot of the students we worked with felt very stuck. In many ways, I think they were less stuck than they thought. And so it was actually really nice to kind of help people reframe that. And I think it was something we were all very surprised by. And I think moving forward, we'll see ourselves sort of shifting that dialogue in our minds of just because somebody says they're feeling stuck and has a lot of like, yeah, but, and I can't do this because they actually, do have a lot of this resiliency. Somewhere we can probably get really creative because we know they've done it before. And the same goes for our staff. Change is hard. Change is hard for everybody. We've all lived it this past year. And I think that, when we look at changing a service or offering a new service or offering a new model of how we can do something unique and different and better, we adapt well to it. We know we can, and we know we can shift to meet the needs toward our mission.
Okay, maybe one last question, and I'll ask you this one as well. I'm curious if you all see demand from graduate students. I know that undergraduates tend to dominate your landscape, but I'm curious, from the large graduate population that we have at Penn State, do you see a demand from them as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Our graduate student interpersonal process groups are some of our most popular groups, and they actually maintain membership most consistently throughout the years. So grad students will often be in a therapy group for maybe their entire time that they're in graduate school, so a number of years. So yeah, grad students also they have the student health insurance. And so, if appropriate, we will help them get connected to longer term services through their insurance with Healthiest You. But ultimately, yeah, they are also a large part of when we're talking about adjusting to college and developmental and identity focused, stress, that's certainly a large part of the pool that we work with. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for being part of this. Thanks to Stephanie. I think it's probably time to wrap it up.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you all for joining us on such an important topic, and we encourage your continuing interest and any support you can give to this incredibly important and in some cases life-saving program at Penn State.
Yeah, we hope it was helpful for everybody. Again, great to see everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time, for your insights, and your expertise. Hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.